Hello there. I'm autistic. And this is a case of autism. I'm not sorry for the image, but I am not happy about it. A fair warning for today's video, I am going to have to get extremely political, but I would still recommend sticking through with what I have to say, despite how uncomfortable it could be to hear, as I believe the subject matter to be of high importance and worth addressing as much as possible. You might also notice that I am reading off a script as opposed to my usual off-the-cuff style of presentation for these videos, and that is because I want to be 100% sure I say everything correct, as details around this topic deserve to be handled with as much seriousness as I can muster. That being said, don't be surprised if I still make light of some aspects, as it is simply in my nature to do so. I have also chose not to pretend as if I'm not reading off of anything, as the extra effort to give off the illusion that I am merely speaking to a camera with nothing in between would not be worth the effort to get a video like this out on time. I understand that it still came out much later than I would have rather, but I unfortunately had other things impeding my ability to make this any sooner. Regardless of this, I hope that you can forgive this awkward choice of presenting myself. Leave it to an autist to commit to avoiding eye contact. With all that preamble out of the way, let us begin with the topic of discussion for today. The fucking US government and its recent statements on autism. For those unaware, a recent report that came out from the Department of Health and Human Services decided to grace our presence by announcing the miraculous discovery of the cause of autism. You may have even noticed many people online making fun of how it was presented with the titular autism announcement meme. As you can imagine, a statement like this would require a massive amount of research and explanation to justify such a report. Unfortunately, the head of the department, RFK Jr., has failed to provide any such tangible evidence as to the research that he supposedly conducted to come to this groundbreaking conclusion. One of the allegedly biggest discoveries in the scientific field of our time is being presented to us, and all that could be mustered is the political equivalent of, "Dude, trust me, bro." What little justification they provide for themselves comes from studies that weren't even conducted under their administration, as they are all at least half a decade old, and, as we'll soon see, are either funded by problematic organizations or are, by their own admission, inconclusive, leading to the Trump administration's inability to provide their own findings to be deeply concerning. This naturally led to a lot of speculation as to any of RFK's research to even be legitimate in the first place. He has, in the past, made grandiose promises of figuring out the secret behind ASD before September ends. This has led many to speculate that he pulled an answer out of his ass in order to satiate those that he made said promise to. On top of that, him being a lawyer gives him a lot of benefits from being able to perpetuate the notion of the autism scare, as it were. I'm not going to spend too much time dwelling on speculation, but considering that this individual has a history of being an unreliable narrator, I'm choosing to leave it at him simply being a biased source and willing to induct fabrications in order to fulfill whatever narrative best suits him. So without even getting into what was said, already the nature of this announcement is plagued with dubious intentions. Unfortunately for us, the actual statements made don't exude any level of reassurance. Before I can even attempt to read the article, it starts out by talking about the rise of individuals with autism in the country as if it were an epidemic. A common misnomer. First of all, acting as if this disability or disorder, or however you wish to categorize it, can constitute any form of disease is highly misinformed and extremely insulting. It's language like this that encourages people to assume that there must be a cure for it because it is simply a sickness no dissimilar to that than the fucking flu. Autism is not a disease, nor is it an infection, ailment, or any sort of plaguing condition. It is merely a different way that people think. The only reason it receives this level of scrutiny is because it is a mental difference rather than a physical one. You wouldn't necessarily tell a paraplegic that they're suffering from some sort of illness, would you? God, I hope not. This point is exacerbated by them referencing how individuals with ASD have increased by, quote, nearly 400% since 2000, and now affect 1 in 31 American children, end quote. A common sticking point to give credit to the classification of epidemic. This is a classic case of causation and correlation. When referring to the increase of individuals with autism within the country, what statistics like these fail to account for is that this data only accounts for the rise of diagnoses and recognition, at least to that by the government themselves. This data is incapable of ever proving whether or not the same degree of people ever existed before, because they were merely unaccounted for up until the last few decades. Autism is a fairly new discovery in the medical field, all things considered, especially when it comes to any form of treatment/assistance. And acting like we can definitively say there's a genuine increase of individuals rather than just an increase of awareness of who we are keeping track of is a grave misdirection of the facts in order to suit the narrative that this must be something to prevent before it gets out of hand. I've always found this sort of fear-mongering disingenuous from anyone spouting it, as I doubt anyone with legitimate concerns even understands why autism is something that should be stopped, as even if the numbers were accurate to the exaggerated degree that the narrative is presenting, what does that even mean? More people are autistic? Why does that matter? Is it more so to incite fear into parents that they have to put extra care into their child than they were expecting to otherwise? Is it a general misunderstanding of what autism is, and the assumption that it's detrimental to the health and growth of anyone diagnosed? Is it that it's most associated with children, being more recently understood and all that, and therefore able to incite more panic due to it affecting the children? Or are people upset because valuable taxpayer dollars go towards supporting the needs of people with a diagnosis rather than insert whatever else they would rather it be spent on, I suppose? Much like autism itself, I believe there to not be a singular thing in which you can explain away to define the question at hand. Instead, the reasons are purposefully scattered around in order to cause more confusion in order to strengthen the argument so it has less of a chance of being debunked. The autism scare is, simply put, the newest excuse to find a minority of people to marginalize in order to facilitate whatever narrative best suits whoever is spreading it. The perpetuation of this otherism is being pushed for the same reasons as for any other marginalized group in existence. Control through fear. My theory as to why autism was a target to begin with is twofold. One, being a relatively new discovery in the medical field means that there's a majority of individuals unfamiliar with what it entails, and therefore lead them to be easily manipulated by those with ulterior motives. Two, autism is most associated with a regression in intelligence, which is factually incorrect, but most importantly, a hindrance in their ability to communicate. Attacking a group that have difficulty standing up for themselves makes them a prime target to say almost whatever you want about them. I swear, I'm gonna talk about what the article actually has to say now, but all this context is important in order to properly put into perspective what it is we're dealing with, both in terms of tone and intention. As far as this article is concerned, there are 2 points of interest that I wish to tackle. The first being regulations being imposed on the FDA for, quote, leucovorin for cerebral folate deficiency. Being that this was the first I've heard of any concern of something completely unrecognizable, I was curious enough to check the link provided in the article, and what do you know? This associated link discloses that it has a conflict of interest, quote unquote, as it received a grant from who else but Autism Speaks! I can't fucking escape them, man. They're just everywhere. I refuse to entertain any statement made in regards to autism that gets backed by that organization, as its mere existence is to guise as assistance with individuals living with autism, when in actuality it simply acts as another point of marginalization that treat autism as if it is a tangential form of retardation. As far as I'm concerned, whatever implementation they are choosing to instill onto the FDA is unnecessary at best and detrimental at worst. But I personally find a lack of motivation in determining the severity of this decision, as I more so want to focus on the part of this article that the internet has collectively decided to clown on out of sheer ridiculousness. I'm sure many of you were waiting in anticipation for me to bring this up, so allow me to satiate your excitement by analyzing what is possibly the most ridiculous statement I have ever heard be uttered by a government official. And that's saying something. The HHS has made the bold claim that the real cause of autism is a chemical compound that goes by the name of acetaminophen. God, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Otherwise known as the main ingredient for the drug Tylenol. So, does that mean vaccines are safe again? In all seriousness, one has to wonder why a pain-relieving chemical being ingested during pregnancy would ever lead to autism for the child bearing. As it turns out, there is a study linked to back up this claim. From 5 years ago, and whose subjects total less than 1,000, a relatively small sample size when trying to determine anything definitive. While the study doesn't have any associated conflict of interest this time around, the researchers themselves admit that even though they came to their own conclusion that this held an increased chance of ASD and also ADHD, apparently, go figure, the research that they conducted, quote, warrants additional investigation. The fact that this study is being used as conclusive evidence to indicate that autism has an undeniable connection to the drug is concerningly laughable. As you can imagine, Tylenol themselves have come out with a public statement denouncing these allegations. They claim that acetaminophen holds no risk over pregnant mothers or their children when taken during pregnancy. I personally find it a little unbelievable to say that Tylenol specifically, quote, is one of the most studied medications in history, end quote. But I'm personally not in a mood to challenge that notion. With all this being said, it fills me with immense concern that the same article also claims to be investing over $50 million to fund their own autism research, as they have proven to be both incompetent at focusing on what matters for autism research and fail to work in the interest of those genuinely affected by it. The current administration is full of snake oil salesmen that are more focused on generating a cult following with the promise of improving lives rather than focusing on acting out on those promises. Instead, they would rather impede lives in order to insist upon their righteous positions as the saviors of autism, rather than bother listening to anything an individual with the titular autism has to say. So, as it turns out, a few hours after I had finished recording, it was brought to my attention that RFK has said more things, but most relevantly, another cause of autism. This time, the target on the dartboard seems to be circumcision. No, this is not a joke. This is an actual statement from a government official. Okay, to give some leeway here, he doesn't claim it to be the circumcision itself, but the Tylenol ingested as a part of the procedure. Even still, if that were true, most of this fucking country would be autistic because of how many goddamn people received circumcisions, but that aside, this also contradicts his previous statements. Isn't Tylenol supposed to be detrimental to the development of a child while still in the womb? Why is there still risk after birth? Is it a risk regardless of development? Or only for children? Another classic case of a liar adding more lies to sound right, but end up outing themselves as a liar. Always pushing the envelope to see what they can get away with, the Trump administration has once again outdone themselves at making me question my reality anytime I hear them say anything with their full chest. And now, back to me from earlier. Clearly, everything that can go wrong is going wrong, and we are the ones left suffering for it. So what can one do when faced with such an overwhelming obstacle as the currently standing government? Personally, I don't feel comfortable putting myself in a position to guide you as to what actions to take, as I believe that to be the decision of the individual, rather than to trust some random public figure that you, at best, have a strong parasocial relationship with. Instead, the only advice I can reasonably give is to listen to what is being said and do your own research. I did the bare minimum for this video and found easy contradictions of my own accord. Nothing is stopping you from doing the same. At the same time, especially if you are autistic yourself, more than ever, you need to speak out against what is happening and push back against this intentionally harmful agenda. We know what's wrong. What we need to do is find our own way to express it. Show the world what this means for us. Speak up in whatever way you can, because even if you don't think you have the right words to properly correlate with your feelings, anything you have to say is better than the silence that the opposition are banking on. In the description of this video, I have left links to all resources used for this discussion and would advise using them as a starting point for your research if you haven't done so already. I know I'm asking a lot, but the more informed you are about the topic at hand, the more prepared you are at being able to stand up for yourself. I want to help prove that we as people, not some diminutive collection of numbers, are capable of speaking up for ourselves. Even those of you who are, for example, non-verbal, have the power to express yourself through other means of communication. All you need is to find what best works for you. For myself, I'm afraid this is the best I can do. But hopefully, it is enough. Thank you for watching, and remember to never let anyone leave you feeling that you can't speak for yourself. Goodbye.